The night everything changed, Alara was wearing the wrong shoes. That detail sounds ridiculous now, but it's the thing she remembers most clearly. The way her heels kept sinking into the freshly cut grass of the Blackwood estate. The little jolt of embarrassment every time she had to yank one free before taking another step toward the main tent. Her husband, Carter, hadn't noticed. He was already 20 feet ahead of her, drink in hand, laughing at something his business partner had said. He hadn't looked back once. That was the summer of her 29th year. 2 years into a marriage she had believed, with everything in her, was built on something real. Alara had grown up in a small town outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. Her mother was a school teacher. Her father repaired appliances out of their garage on weekends to help cover the mortgage. She'd been the first in her family to get a scholarship to a university in the Northeast, the first to graduate with honors, the first to land a job in finance in New York City, working 60-hour weeks in a glass tower that looked out over the Hudson. She was not naive, she was not soft, but she had loved Carter Whitson with a particular kind of trust that, she would later understand, was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. Carter was brilliant in the way that certain men are brilliant, the kind that makes a room rearrange itself around them. He'd built Whitson Capital from 3 employees and a shared office space in Midtown into one of the fastest-growing private equity firms on the East Coast. He had presence, conviction. He could make a pitch feel like a revelation. When he'd met Alara at a conference in Chicago, she was presenting, he was in the audience. He'd sent a handwritten note to her hotel room that night. Just 4 lines, she still remembered every word. They married 18 months later in a small ceremony in Vermont. Her mother cried the entire way through. Carter's family had flown in from Boston, poised and pleasant, and his mother, Sylvia, had held Alara's hands at the reception and told her she was exactly what Carter needed. Alara had believed that. She had also, at some point in the 2 years that followed, begun to study Korean. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It hadn't been motivated by suspicion. She'd picked it up the way she picked up most things. Methodically, because it interested her. She'd been handling a small portfolio of South Korean tech investments for a client and wanted to understand the nuance of what she was reading in untranslated reports. She'd downloaded an app, then bought a textbook, then started attending a weekly language exchange meetup in her neighborhood on Wednesday evenings, while Carter worked late, which was most evenings. Within 14 months she was reading business articles fluently. Within 18 she could hold a full conversation without hesitating. She never mentioned it to Carter. Not because she was hiding it. It simply never came up. That's the part that still strikes her as almost funny, in a hollow sort of way. She wasn't preparing anything. She wasn't suspicious. She was just learning, quietly, the way she had always done everything. And the universe, or whatever you want to call it, was making arrangements she didn't know about yet. The Blackwood Summer Gala was an annual event, the kind that served as unofficial currency in the world Carter operated in. Attendance meant you mattered. The host, Preston Blackwood, ran a hedge fund with tentacles in 4 continents, and his guest list was curated with the precision of a military operation. Being there meant deals. Being there meant visibility. Carter had been going for 3 years. This was the first year he'd brought Alara. She'd asked him once, the year before, why she never came. He'd said it was boring for spouses. She'd accepted that. The tent stretched across the east lawn of the estate like something out of a period film. Chandeliers hanging from rigging, round tables draped in ivory linen, servers moving between guests with the soundless efficiency of people who had been trained never to be noticed. Alara had found her seat, poured herself a glass of water, and begun the quiet work of existing gracefully in a room where she knew almost no one. Carter was at the bar with Preston and 2 other men she didn't recognize. They'd been talking for nearly 40 minutes. She wasn't watching him. She was in conversation with the woman seated to her left, the wife of a Boston-based developer, discussing, of all things, the best farmers markets in Lower Manhattan. It was comfortable. It was pleasant. Alara was good at conversations like this. She'd had plenty of practice. Then she heard it. Not the words first. The voice. Carter's voice, low and close, somewhere just behind the canvas partition to her right. The tent had a back corridor where the servers moved between the kitchen and the floor. And there was a seam in the lining, not visible from where Alara sat, but thin enough that sound passed through it like smoke through a screen door. She heard Carter laugh. And then she heard someone respond, in Korean. Not tourist Korean. Not halting, self-conscious Korean. Fluent, easy, the kind you grow up with. Alara didn't react. She kept her eyes on the woman beside her, nodded at something about heirloom tomatoes, and listened. The woman on the other side of the partition said, in Korean, "He still doesn't know you're here?" Carter answered, in English this time, lower. "She thinks I'm with Preston." Then back to Korean, from the woman. You told me she doesn't understand anything you do anyway. That she just smiles and looks pretty at these things. Alara's water glass was exactly 1 inch from the edge of the table. She noticed that. She noticed the particular temperature of the air in that moment, the smell of the gardenias in the centerpiece, the exact pitch of the string quartet playing somewhere across the lawn. Everything went very, very quiet inside her. Carter laughed again. The easy laugh. The one she'd loved. He said, still in English, she's decorative, always has been. Then the woman, in Korean again, good, then we don't have to rush anything. The deal closes in October. After that it doesn't matter who knows what deal, Alara thought. She did not turn around, she did not stand up. She picked up her water glass and took a small, composed sip, and continued her conversation about farmers markets, and the entire time, some part of her that was separate from the socializing, gracious, smiling woman at that table was very quietly memorizing every syllable she had just heard. The woman's name, she would learn later, was Soo-yeon Park. She was 34, based in Seoul and New York, and she was the founder of a boutique investment advisory that had recently begun structuring a co-investment deal with Whitson Capital. A deal valued at somewhere north of $60 million. The deal was legitimate. The relationship was not. Alara found this out over the next 3 weeks, not through jealousy or gut feeling, but through the same methodical approach she applied to everything else. She went back to work the Monday after the gala and began quietly to pull threads. She was careful. She used a personal laptop, never her work machine. She paid for a private email address in cash at a drugstore kiosk. She requested her own financial records. Accounts she was a joint holder on. Accounts she hadn't fully examined in months. Because she had trusted Carter to manage the household finances, the way she trusted the contractors to manage the renovation of their Connecticut home. She'd set the parameters. He'd handled the execution. What she found in those accounts took her breath away and then, almost immediately, sharpened her focus into something cold and clear. Over 14 months, Carter had moved money, not dramatically, not in the kind of transfers that trigger automatic flags, but persistently, in increments that individually looked like business expenses. Consulting fees, research costs, a retainer for an overseas advisory firm, each one documented, each one explainable on its own. Together they traced a pattern. Funds being slowly redirected from a family trust Alara had contributed to equally, structured through a series of LLCs she'd never been told existed. He was not just cheating on her, he was building a financial exit. Quietly, methodically. The same way she might have done it if she were that kind of person. She sat with that knowledge for one full evening. Just sat with it, alone in their apartment on a Thursday night, while Carter was at a client dinner. Which was the kind of thing that takes on a different texture once you know what you know. She let herself feel everything. The grief, which was real and sharp, the rage, which was equally real, and then something underneath both of those, something that was harder to name but felt, if she were honest, a little like clarity. She did not call him. She did not confront him. She called her college roommate, Deja, who had gone to law school and was now a partner at a firm in Washington, D.C. I need a referral, Alara said. Family law, New York, the best you know of. Deja, who knew Alara's voice better than almost anyone, did not ask questions. She said, I'll send you a name by morning. The attorney's name was Caroline Fitch. She had silver hair cut short and a way of listening that made you feel like every word was being catalogued. Alara met with her the following Tuesday, laid out everything she had found. The account statements, the LLC filings she'd tracked through public records, the dates, the amounts, the pattern, and watched Caroline's expression shift almost perceptibly, from professional neutrality to something that looked, briefly, like respect. You came prepared, Caroline said. I always do, Alara said. What followed was not quick. That's the part no one tells you when you imagine this kind of reckoning. You imagine a confrontation, a dramatic scene, a door slamming. You imagine the moment of exposure as the ending. But exposure isn't an ending, it's a beginning, and the beginning comes with paperwork and strategy and patience. A great deal of patience, which Alara had, because she had grown up watching her parents solve problems slowly and completely, without drama, without waste. Caroline advised her not to move anything yet, not to tip her hand, not to change her behavior at home in any way that might alert Carter. The goal was to get ahead of him legally. To file in a jurisdiction and at a moment where the division of assets would be hardest for him to manipulate. The LLCs he'd created were incorporated in Delaware, which created certain complications but also certain opportunities. Caroline had done this before, she knew the terrain. Alara went home that night and made dinner. She set the table. When Carter came in at 8:30, she asked about his day, and he said long, and she nodded, and they ate together in the specific kind of silence that had, she realized now, been their default for at least the past year. She had thought it was the comfortable silence of two busy people. It was not. She began keeping notes, not on anything connected to home. She bought a small notebook, the kind you can get at any drugstore, and kept it in her work bag. Every unusual expense she noticed, every date Carter mentioned being unreachable, every inconsistency however small. She was not obsessive about it. She was thorough. There is a difference. 6 weeks after the gala, something happened that accelerated the timeline. She was at her desk on a Wednesday afternoon when she received, through her work email, a forwarded message from the compliance officer at her firm. It was routine. A disclosure request related to a potential conflict of interest flagged by an automated system. The conflict in question was a client account that had recently initiated a new investment position. The co-investor on the other side of that position was listed as an entity called Park Whitson Advisory Partners. Alara read that name twice. She clicked through to the filing. Park Whitson Advisory Partners had been incorporated 4 months ago in the state of Delaware. The listed principals were Soo-Yeon Park and Carter Allen Whitson. Carter had incorporated a business entity with his mistress and had not disclosed it to Alara. He had also, it appeared, structured it in such a way that it was positioned to benefit from a deal that was, tangentially, connected to Alara's own professional client relationships. Which meant this was no longer only a personal matter. Alara called Caroline Fitch from the parking garage beneath her office building, standing between two concrete pillars in the gray afternoon light. It just became a fraud issue, she said. Caroline was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Tell me everything. What followed happened faster than Alara had expected. Caroline contacted a forensic accountant who had worked on similar cases. The accountant spent 3 weeks untangling the web of transfers Carter had made over the previous 14 months. The figure, when fully documented, was just over $900,000. Money redirected from jointly held assets. Money that had flowed into Park Whitson Advisory Partners as a capital contribution. Money that had in effect been used to fund Carter's second life. The divorce filing happened on a Tuesday morning in October. Alara had chosen the date carefully. 3 days before a major investment close Carter had been working toward for months. A close that would require his full attention, and that would be significantly complicated by the sudden disclosure of pending litigation over financial misconduct. Caroline had advised that the timing was strategic without being retaliatory. Alara had nodded and said she understood the distinction. She moved out of the apartment the same day the papers were served. She'd arranged it in advance. A furnished sublet in the West Village, 2 blocks from a coffee shop she'd always liked, owned by a woman who made the kind of oat milk latte that required no conversation to order. She took her clothes, her documents, her laptop, and a small framed photograph of her parents that sat on the bookshelf in the hallway. A photo Carter had never, not once in 2 years, commented on or asked about. She did not take anything else. Carter called her 4 times that afternoon. She let every call go to voicemail. His 5th call came at 7:14 p.m. She was in her new kitchen, eating takeout directly from the container, sitting on the floor because the sublet's chairs were stacked in the corner and she hadn't bothered to unstick them yet. She looked at the phone. She put it face down on the hardwood and finished her dinner. His attorney reached out to Caroline within 48 hours. The offer that came with that outreach was, from a legal standpoint, an opening bid. Lowball, aggressive, structured to protect the LLC assets and minimize his exposure on the fraud allegation. Caroline sent Alara the summary in an email with a single line underneath. This is not serious, we don't respond yet. Alara replied with a thumbs up and went back to work. The investment close fell apart. Not entirely because of the litigation, but the timing didn't help. When news that Whitson Capital's founder was facing a fraud-adjacent civil dispute reached 2 of the LPs in the deal, one of them pulled their commitment pending review. The domino that followed was slow but audible. Preston Blackwood, who had known Carter for years, quietly declined to comment when a financial trade publication asked for a quote about the partnership's standing. Soo-Yeon Park dissolved Park Whitson Advisory Partners in November. Alara read about it in a regulatory filing database she checked on her lunch break, eating a sandwich at her desk. She felt very little. She had expected to feel something large. Satisfaction, maybe, or some version of vindication. What she felt was more like the sensation of putting down something heavy you've been carrying for a while. A quiet kind of relief. The settlement was finalized in late February. Carter had wanted to fight it. His attorneys, to their credit, had apparently advised him against that course of action in strong terms, because the documented evidence of financial misconduct in the context of a divorce would not play well in front of any judge who reviewed the full record. He settled. The terms included the full return of the $900,000 redirected from joint assets, her share of Whitson Capital equity which, even diminished, was not nothing, and the Connecticut property, which she sold 6 months later and used the proceeds to pay off her student loans from law school. She'd done an evening JD years ago, a fact that had never seemed relevant until it suddenly was. She told Caroline about the law degree at their final meeting. Caroline had looked at her for a long moment. "You understand you could have handled more of this yourself," she said. "I know," Alara said, "but I didn't want to. I wanted someone in my corner." Caroline smiled at that. It was the first time Alara had seen her smile in the full 6 months they'd worked together. Alara kept the Wednesday language exchange meetups. She still went, most weeks, when her schedule allowed. She'd added Mandarin to the rotation by spring. The group met in the back room of a restaurant in the East Village. A rotating cast of maybe 12 people, different levels, different backgrounds. All there because language, at its best, is a way of insisting on a fuller version of yourself than the one other people have decided to see. She thought about that sometimes. In the abstract way, you think about the things that changed your life when you're far enough away from the changing to look back at it clearly. She had not been a woman who needed saving. She had been a woman who was underestimated. Quietly, casually, in the way that certain men underestimate the women beside them, not even maliciously, just out of habit, out of the comfortable assumption that proximity is the same as knowledge, that you can know someone's name and their face and their role in your life, and never once wonder what else they might understand. Carter had stood 3 feet from her, and said, in a language he believed was a wall between them, that she was decorative. Always has been. He had not thought to wonder why she was smiling. She was smiling because she already knew, because she had known since the moment she heard his voice through that canvas partition and felt, beneath the shock and the grief and the first clean cut of betrayal, something settle into place. A plan not yet fully formed but beginning, the way all serious things begin, as a very quiet, very private decision. The city outside her window looked the same as it always had. Her coffee was hot. The oat milk latte woman had finally stopped asking her name and just started making it when she walked in, which was its own small form of being known. She had a full day ahead of her. She had always had a full day ahead of her. She picked up her coat and her bag and her notebook, the drugstore one, which was nearly full now, and which she would not be needing much longer. And she walked out the door into the ordinary morning where no one was watching and no one was waiting, and she was at last exactly who she had always been.